For this one, we're gonna light incense because we might just need cleansing energy. We might need cleansing energy. Pay attention to the length of this. This doesn't last too long. Just there might be some continuity errors. We're gonna start a little different. We're gonna start a little different today because the analytics tell me that, if I make a 30-minute video, only about 30% of folks make it to the end. So let me not bury the lead. And as I say this next part, I want to be really clear that I'm saying it from a space of empathy. Not just empathy because that's a catchphrase I say on this channel a lot, but I was a man that sat in the seat of the type of person that may have watched buck breaking unironically 10 or more years ago and believed the harmful things and even at times engaged in harmful rhetoric about queer people and women and so on. I, like a lot of you, am a product of a different time and a different generation. And I say this because I want you to recognize that I'm coming from where you're coming from and that I arrived where I am through work and effort and education. And at the core of the criticism I'm about to offer you, especially in this first section, because I want to get this out the way up front so you guys can go on about your business. I'm saying it as a person who knows exactly where you're coming from and as a person who has traversed through that struggle to get to a new space. And not enough people really understand what's going on with us. Even we don't quite get it. And so when I see and hear things and the way people talk about Black men in the media, I get frustrated because I'm like, man, if y'all really understood, you would be more empathetic. But then we get shit like buck breaking. And it's like, fuck, what do I say? What do I say? Now, I know this is very much, at least I pray that this is very much just a niche, ridiculous thing that a small portion of Black men are into, unironically, but that it exists at all. That this, from my understanding, is the #1 documentary on Amazon right now. Only so many people like me rented it to make fun of it. Like some people legitimately think it's a thing. You all purport to care about Black people and want to fight white supremacy, but it's really glaringly obvious, at least from my perspective, that that's not what's happening. Y'all are fighting for Black patriarchy, and patriarchy is not our friend, and it is not going to help us. It has not helped us at all up until this point. And if you knew your history, you wouldn't be operating on the myth that we were so much better when patriarchy was in place. The irony behind this whole buck breaking thing is that the real emasculization of Black men, and I say that to just mean the way Black men are broken down in this society, is economic, it's legal, it's educational, it's medical, it is not sexual. I watched this whole 2-hour-long documentary about buck breaking. Nowhere in this 2-hour-long video is any form of accountability for where we fit in this equation. It's all everybody else's fault. And with that in mind, look, y'all, regardless of how you feel about LGBTQ people and this myth that I'll break down later if you want to stick around, in the spirit of brotherhood, what I ask you all is to basically just kind of shut up and fall back. Because that whole protect the provider role, you're not doing it. Because if you were doing it, the streets wouldn't look the way they look. And don't get me wrong, I see Black men out there doing work. Like those dudes been out there, regardless of who they love or who the people they help love. Y'all are only on Facebook and YouTube. And you know what? Just stay there. It's perfectly fine. But if you could just and let the real folks do the work, the real protectors and providers who are Black men and Black women and Black queer people and Black trans people that have been out there for a while now. And again, if you know your history, you know that they've always been out there. That's the saddest thing, is that the people who get the least out of us are always the ones fighting the hardest for us, and we treat them like shit for it. Yeah, do that. Because I got nothing else for y'all. But if you want to stick around and watch me try to break down the particulars of this, this is the Black Media Breakdown. I really didn't want to watch this, y'all. I wanted to talk about it because it was in my feeds from like a lot of black men I'm associated with. Some legitimately looking for people's perspective, but others just like that's truly what they believe. And, you know, you went algorithm. I watched it and here I am making a whole video about it. Bravo. I wanted to say something about it because it's Pride Month and I was trying to engage in my little platform, you know, something to support the rights and the fight for equality for LGBTQ people, especially Black queer youth. But I wanted it to be something that was authentic to me in my world and not just a throwaway nod to gay people for a cheap pop or some algorithm love. And so I knew this was a thing. I figured, hey, I'm pretty well versed in the Hotep arts and I'm a cis-het black man. And I'm able to parse through this relatively objectively to really engage with it, not just from a form of how much it hurts me, but to kind of assess it critically and try to be empathetic to the concerning space where this comes from. So let me just dive in there. But I really didn't want to watch it. So for the movie, I can't reproduce a lot of it here because Nasheed is known for taking people's stuff down. And I really just don't feel like it won't bother doing like a element by element refutation of all the many things that are wrong in it, because that's kind of the wrong way to go about it. The movie basically just gish gallops throughout the movie. And gish galloping, for those who don't know, is this tactic that is really popular in these conservative, pseudo-intellectual bullshit artists' fields. The core thing you need to get to understand the inherent harm and just pure bullshittery of this film is to recognize that the movie operates with one core notion, which is that Black gay people aren't real. There are no Black gay people. Any Black people that say they are gay were tricked into being gay by white people through abuse or drugs or some other form of manipulation. The gaslighting is to an unreal level, and it's so incredibly illogical. Like at one point, Nasheed appears on camera to talk about Stonewall, and he describes Stonewall as a Black riot. He says that Stonewall happened because Black people who happened to be at a club that was ran by the mafia, and the mafia didn't pay their bills and yada, 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 so Black people fought the police. He completely leaves out the fact that it was Black queer people at a gay club that was being raided because the police consistently raided these gay clubs. Like yes, he had some of the elements correct, right? But he says Black people fought the police. This is who started the riot, Marsha P. Johnson. And what Nasheed wants you to do, he's expecting nobody to look this up and Google this shit, is he wants you to see Marsha P. Johnson as just a Black person. He does not want you to acknowledge that Marsha P. Johnson was a queer trans woman. And that is the core of the movie's ethos, that we can attribute anything good to Black people, especially Black men, and anything bad that happens in relation to Blackness or white supremacy or any failures that we have as a people, that is because of white people or feminists or queer people. And if any of those people are in any way possible to be described as Black, they're not. And that would be bad enough, but that serves as a foundation to build a slew of other harmful beliefs, like that Black gay people are actually pedophiles, and if they're not pedophiles, they're operatives with the CIA. And also somewhere in there is like straight QAnon level bullshit. There's something about transhumanism where like the end result of Black Effiminization is also like robots for white people because they'll live forever. And then some dude brought up something called the Paracelium thing.
Paracelsium corpse phenomenon. Paracelsium corpse.
I Googled this. I could literally not find this word this dude used. And they just left that shit in. And it's like, I didn't expect better, right? But this level of gaslighting, the complete absence of empathy for Black queer people, especially Black queer youth, who they truly, truly dehumanized throughout the entirety of this film, it was still shocking to behold. It was shocking to see all these ostensibly pro-Black people, Black men and women, just talk bad about their own folks with no sense of agency or connection to the struggle that those folks have. Like, these aren't our family members, our cousins, our brothers and sisters, our parents in some cases. And then, like, I guess this has already become a meme. You have these images of like Black slave rape porn cartoons, like I think 11 or 12 of them. And they splice these images with legitimate images of slavery being depicted from, paintings from hundreds of years ago. And they put them side by side. Like, you're not gonna notice that this came from an artist from the 1800s and this came off Fiverr. In between all of this nonsense, every once in a while, the movie does hit on an important issue that Black people need to be thinking about and engaging with. Like, white supremacy is systemic. And this is something I'll get to in another video, but a lot of people, Black people included, are not fully recognizing that systemic racism is a problem and we have to attack it systemically. They also talk about how LGBTQ people and white feminism have often excluded Black queer people and Black women from their movements. And when they haven't excluded them, they've tried to minimize them as much as possible. Those are important things to get into, but that's not what they want. They didn't even really bother to get into what buck breaking really was. And I came into buck breaking kind of a skeptic. My research showed me a little bit more otherwise, but they only spent 20 or 30 minutes talking about the actual act that was buck breaking. They could have talked about the fact that the sexual assault of Black men and Black women during slavery and afterward is still having an effect on the sexuality of Black men and women today. But the problem is you can't talk about that issue without also talking about where it comes from, which is still patriarchy, and that's too close. That's too close to accountability for these motherfuckers, so they didn't bother. The movie's goal was to coddle a specific subset of Black men who have truly been emasculated by white supremacy, but they haven't been assaulted by slave masters. They've been beaten down and chewed up by this system, and instead of looking to the system to correct it, they're looking to see who they can inflict pain on to make them feel the way they feel. The movie does all this talking about the destruction of the Black family, insinuating that it's somehow homosexuality that's destroying Black families, when in real life it's economics and health and substance abuse and jail time. Those are the things that keep Black men away from their families, not Black men just suddenly drinking some soy milk and becoming gay. And there's research that shows this, but it's real research, so they're never gonna find this shit. Research shows that, first off, Black men who have access to their families because they're married or because they're in the picture spend more time and energy helping to raise their kids than any other race of men. And it shows that when Black men are separated from their families for whatever reason, it's usually because they become economically inviable and thus become liabilities on the families they help create. And that creates conflict, and those Black men leave because of that. Or those Black men turn to crime to try to find a way to contribute to their households, and then they end up going to jail or they end up dead. And regardless of which one of those things happen, those children then grow up without a parent in the home and more likely to experience poverty themselves, and the cycle repeats. And that's like critical race theory, systemic racism 101 shit. That you don't need a degree to Google that shit. But they don't talk about it at all in this movie. They may sprinkle in some of that shit, but only in between images of Black boys twerking. Did I not mention that there's at least 15 minutes of twerking in this movie, but it's all teenage Black boys?
Is nothing but an attempt to emasculate Black malehood.
The men and women that consume this hysterical Hotep media unironically have usually really faced these type of systemic barriers. And that's why, I hope I'm not coming off wrong to some people, but I can't truly just dig in because I understand where this comes from. This comes from a severe sense of lack and weakness and insecurity. And it's ironically a lot like the edgelord red pill type people I talked about a few videos back, where these are people trying to make sense of a world that has completely defeated them and made them feel weak and powerless. And they're trying to address it. And they recognize at least that white supremacy is the problem. But instead of really focusing on that, on the systems of oppression that are really out there hurting us, these dudes are taking aim at easy prey. They're punching down. They know that Black queer people, and to a lesser extent Black women, are the only people that are technically lower on the totem pole than them. So that's where they aim their ire at, because they don't want any smoke with the actual systems of oppression that we need to be trying to dismantle. And then on top of that, there's the people like Nasheed who just grift off of that energy. They know how these people feel. They know these people are looking for guidance, and they say, you know what? There's some money to be made there. So let's talk about Tariq Nasheed, and I think we need to start another incident. Tariq Nasheed is a master grifter. Like, he's a grifter built in a lab. It is amazing. Grifters, especially Black grifters, are all usually built from the same, material. They're usually men. They have backgrounds with suspicious credentials. They almost always offer a complex mixture of Black liberation ideology with conservative principle values and a nice sprinkling of homophobia and misogyny, to kind of make it all come together. And the key thing, the thing that we really need to engage with, not just Black people, but everybody, is that they're almost always authoritarians. And that is really appealing for people who feel like there's a lack of order and power in their own lives. The sense of straight talk and the lack of shame and the outright refusal to ever admit wrong or take an L is what appeals to the lizard brains of these people. And for these people looking to express and explain their struggles, that type of straight talk strongman act is super, super appealing. And Nasheed fits this perfectly. He has the Black liberation rhetoric of Umar Johnson. He has the straight talk misogynoir of Kevin Samuels, and he packages it up in a really powerful and effective package. He's a good looking guy, and his way of talking that he got from his experience as a pimp is, it's effective, it's useful. He's a salesman above all.
Anybody can say there's a pimp. I go to a club and a lot of young guys, I'm a pimp, I'm a pimp, I'm a pimp. But you can tell in the attitude. I even wrote a book on the game, man. I got a book. I'm one of the 5 pimps in history to actually have a book about the game.
Now, I don't know if he was actually a pimp. He's denied that. But if you look at all of his old books, which I refuse to read, it's in there somewhere. And that's the other crazy scene, because Nasheed came on the scene and truly showed us who he was. He was given this proto pickup artist act. Ironically, it is structural racism that probably kept him from being a pillar of the pickup artist community, because he was doing all this pickup artist shit in the mid to early 2000s before it really took off over a decade later.
Number 2, you have to have verbal skills.
Women have heard every pickup line imaginable. You've gotten lazy with your game, so when you step to women in the state you're in now, you're just gonna say the same cliche things that they're used to hearing all the time.
Hey, how are you?
Good, how are you?
I haven't seen you in a while. You look different. Haircut, new shoes, you look great.
Well, I know this is generally a little odd and maybe a little late, but I would love to.
And it's not that he didn't try. Somehow he had talked his way into getting a little bit of everywhere. He was on the Tonight Show. He supposedly spoke at Harvard. He really took this, early caricature of Black masculinity as the hypersexualized fuckboy and just ran with that shit. But if you were around then, you remember this image, the big suits, Steve Harvey, Big Willie rap, all of that stuff was real strong, like 97 to like 2008, until Obama kind of threw things off course. Nasheed presented himself as this pimp caricature. He modeled a lot of his books off of old hood philosophy stuff that, if you're not, from that time and era, you may not know, but like the works of Donald Goines, and most significantly Iceberg Slim's Pimp, which clearly was his like core influence for his entire public identity. But then in around 2008, 2009, his whole pimp thing had worn off, and he started to say, I gotta reinvent myself. So he popped up again in the early 2010s as this radical neo-Hotep and released Hidden Colors, which, so Hidden Colors.
From executive producer, who has appeared on The Tonight Show, Late Night with Conan O'Brien, and various MTV and VH1 programs.
Our history, for some reason, it becomes offensive to people. So we have to stop being afraid to tell what our true history is.
As a work of Black film, Hidden Colors is a mixed bag of genuine examinations of the erasure of Black and African history worldwide. And like, that's something important and useful to do. Like right now, I'm watching the High on the Hog documentary, and it's in the kind of the same vein where it's talking about all these elements of African culture and history that are so known around the world, but nobody attributes it to its original space. That's nice. I give credit to the movie for talking about Yasuke, the African samurai that worked with Nobunaga Oda in that, Warring States period in Japan. That's a cool story that I hadn't heard before I saw that film. But like, at a certain point in time later, they're talking about Black boys twerking again.
Men don't have to be men anymore. So what's the best thing to do? Since you're giving so many favors to women, I might as well be a woman.
Because Nasheed is, very formidable and skilled at being a troll, because he is very Donald Trump adjacent and knowing what makes his audience click and tick, he has leaned heavily into his anti-feminist, anti-LGBTQ persona online. And at times has also came out against the alt-right and racism and stuff like that. But in a way that uniquely courts this sad intersection of Black men who recognize that racism is a problem, but also don't like the fact that they may be losing their standing as patriarchs, even though most of those dudes were never patriarchs over any fucking thing to begin with. But we're trying to be positive. We're trying to be empathetic. Positivity. And all of this only works because there is something unique to the nature of homophobia in Black communities. I don't know how much different it is at a macro level, but from my perspective, there's some elements that need to be engaged with, or, there's better understanding for us to have. Homophobia is a complex social issue. And as I speak on it, understand I know I'm speaking on it as an outsider who has never actually experienced homophobia. So understand you're not getting the whole story with my input, but I think my input here is useful because I'm going to give it from the perspective of a person that's participated and contributed to the problem. And I'm usually against any phrase that sounds like, why are Black people in America so blank? Like, that's usually just anti-Blackness wrapped up in somebody's warped sense of the world. There's usually not anything bad about Black people that is unique to just Black people that can't be explained by white supremacy. And so as a whole, homophobia from Black people looks a lot like homophobia from everybody else in the country. It greatly hinges on conservative ideologies about appropriate gender performances and binary sexual identities and patriarchy and yada, yada, yada. Those are the big buckets. We kind of know that. But with Black people, you have to add that intersection of race to the equation, and that changes how homophobia feels, probably, and also how homophobia comes off and is created within that community. But first, is it real? Are Black people more homophobic than anybody else? Looking at the data that I found, it's hard to say that that's not true. Now, are we a lot more homophobic than anybody else? Maybe, maybe not. But statistically, from the data that's out there, we do have more negative opinions about gay people than other races. Now, there's a lot of caveats I could throw out there to explain that away, but I won't bother. The reality is, it is what it is. I remember when it fully became impossible to deny this back in 2008 with the California Prop 8 bill. And this was a bill because California had made several strides towards marriage equality in the early 2000s. California is very liberal, and they got there a lot faster than everybody else did. And at the same time, Barack Obama's running for president. In 2008, conservatives put up Prop 8, which, long story short, was meant to try to kill any marriage equality that was going on in California at the time. And Barack Obama is running for president. So what does that mean? That means that there was a significant increase in Black voters in the state of California. And what happened? Prop 8 passed 52-48, a very, very slim margin in the most liberal state in the country. And you're asking, well, why was that? It's because Black people voted for Prop 8 by a margin of 70% to 30%. Now, you could blame everybody. That's not just Black people's fault. 52% of the population is 52% of the population, and California's Black population is probably only, 13, 20%. I got to look that number up. It'll flash right here. So, and I always like try to talk about that because people like to blame black voters for any particular thing they don't like about their political movement. And there were countless hot take and apology blogs that came out saying, well, it wasn't really black folks' fault. Well, accountability, y'all. Let's just own the shit that we're dealing with. Let's own the shit that we're doing. Many might point to the influence of the black church as a way to explain this. And that makes sense. The black church historically has been a center for black culture pretty much since slavery. The civil rights movement came out of the black church in the 1960s, slave rebellions, escapes, soul food, music, R&B. So much of the conceptualization of what blackness is in America owes something to what the black church was throughout the last 100 or so years. But if you've watched this movie or if you've watched Hidden Colors, you'll recognize that at least this particular flavor of homophobia, it's not very churchy. And to be, fair to the black church, black gay people are all up and through the black church. Now, they're not necessarily made to feel welcome, but if you know anything about black Christians in the black church, then you know that there's a lot of representation there, probably way more so than the churches of white or Latino or Asian people. This is my perspective, but I've seen enough black choirs and heard enough gospel music to know that there's definitely some queer influence there. There's a don't ask, don't tell thing going on, but it's in there. So what's clear, especially for this effeminization myth, is that it's not a religious conceptualization. It's not coming from church. It's not even really coming from other like normative religious walks. This is a uniquely Hotep ideology. Quick disclaimer, if you haven't caught on, because I'm sure I've left a few breadcrumbs out there, I know a little bit about some real Hotepery. And this is greatly because that is essentially how I was raised. Now, when I was a kid, we weren't calling it Hoteps. We were calling it Pan-Africanism. And that is how I grew up. Pan-Africanism is an umbrella term for the various political, social, educational, and, to an extent, economic movements of Black people. And the main focus of these movements is that they're founded in the belief that African people across the world should come together because we share a common history and common interests and common challenges and barriers to our success. There's no explicit doctrine, which is why, the definition of Hotep can be a lot of different things. But the core is that Pan-Africanism really wants to celebrate and maybe even embellish African history and culture, while as much as possible rejecting and separating ourselves from white or European cultural norms and belief systems, except of course patriarchy. We love that shit.
Well, I say the pants sagging down is just a subconscious invitation for homosexuality. You see, it's revealing the buttocks. So you step out of the pants, you're gonna put on a dress.
And that's kind of the problem. These ideologies have a lot of value if you've ever really been in there. Like if you like Tobe and Gwiwe, like that's the energy that I had growing up. That's what being a Pan-African Hotep felt like when I was a kid. It didn't look like this new shit that's out here. And like, I just kind of own that, and it is what it is, which is why I don't really engage and have separated greatly from those communities. The sense I get, and this is mostly just my perspective, is that as a whole, the image that a lot of Black people have in mind when they think about freedom and equality and escaping from oppression is an image of success that looks very much like what white success looks like. At the risk of being dismissive of the work and efforts of, our ancestors, if you look at MLK and Malcolm X and the Nation of Islam, and even going back to Marcus Garvey and the Garveyites, which is where a lot of this Hotep shit gets its foundational realities from, they all wanted to make sure they looked a certain way. It was very clean cut. It was very anti what the image of Blackness was at the time. And, say what you want, the underlining reason for that is acceptability politics. And you can't have this clean, acceptable Negro image of Blackness that you're saying, this is why we deserve freedom, this is why we deserve empathy. And then, it doesn't match, at least in their minds, with homosexuality, because at the time and still today, queer people are not accepted in white communities. And that is what it is. And because of that, I think a lot of people that call themselves being for Black liberation feel like they must marginalize and minimalize any queer elements within our communities because that's going to serve as a barrier to equality. There's this sense that black people are competing with gay people for liberation and equality. Like there's only so much freedom that can go around. We are all begging white supremacist capitalist patriarchy for the opportunity to be seen as human. You see that when you hear black people get really angry about gay people calling their civil rights movement a civil rights movement, as if we own the word civil. And don't get me wrong, I've heard some... No, I'm not done yet, Rohan. I think for black men in particular, especially right now in the post-Trump, post-Obama, Me Too era, the nature of homophobia is almost like a crutch for us to at least have something that we still kind of know to be true and to rearrange our identities on. As black men my age start to push 40 and maybe even 50 that haven't had the success they desired and have been beaten down and chewed up by white supremacist systems, jumping into this theory that the reason why their failure exists is not just because of white supremacy, but because of gay people, it gives them, like I've said earlier, an easy target. Sociologist C.J. Pascoe calls this the F-word discourse, and it's a tradition of dialogue between cis-het boys, not just black, but pretty much all men. And we tease and joke about being gay and acting gay with the homies as a joke. And the punchline of the joke is, of course I'm not gay. This is meant to be harmless, and it's something that happens really only among heterosexual boys. And it allows us to disentangle the nature and the reality for gay people from our words and experiences and behavior. So even if it's harmful in reality, because we say we don't intend to do harm, we just assume that's where it ends. I think that's a foundational mechanism for how we get to homophobia, in that we are creating hierarchies in our head about what is good and what is not. So I've talked all this time and I haven't talked about buck breaking. Buck breaking is a thing, or was a thing, but not the way it's described in the movie. When you look at slave narratives like Oluda Equiano's slave narrative or Frederick Douglass' slave narrative, there's moments in there where they allude to the idea that they may have been abused or assaulted by white slave masters. There's also the record of Thomas Thistlewood, who they do bring up for 30 seconds in the movie, who was a Jamaican slave owner that was, I guess, prolific in his sexual abuse of all of his slaves, male and female alike. And it's just not a stretch, considering the barbarism that was American chattel slavery, to say that there was probably at least rampant abuse by white slave owners. But the way it's presented in the movie as this ritualistic, widespread torture, there's not a lot of evidence for that. Moreover, as I said at the beginning, even if it was, it doesn't legitimize this effeminization myth that we've been running with for the last, I feel like this has been a thing for a good 5-6 years now. As soon as Young Thug, I will always talk about this. When Young Thug wore a dress, niggas lost their mind. And here's my galaxy brain theory on why that is such a key figure. For black men around my age, this is a thing that I've been hearing for years. But for black men under 30, the Gen Z and under people, they're not talking about this the same, which thank fucking God. The thing that I think sticks in the craw of my generation of black men is that we have recognized that our sensibilities of what is cool and what is appropriate and what is black are less and less relevant in 2021. And I think that is hard for us because we were the first real hip hop generation where in the 90s and early 2000s, black art and style became the massive worldwide force that it is today. So for those black men that are in their 40s, their experiences in their teens and 20s felt like feeling the entire world revolved around our whims and our ideology and our culture and our music and our art. And if we said something was hot, then the whole world said, yeah, that's hot. And if we said, man, this artist is who you should be listening to, then the whole world listened to that artist, and that artist traveled worldwide. And the thing is, that hasn't changed. Hip hop and black art still is a worldwide force. You hear them in Buck Breaking talk about the fact that everybody wants a piece of black culture, and there are white girls blackfishing so that they can be influencers that are seen as black. And I talked about how K-pop is basically just black R&B from the late 90s and the early 2000s. Or Rihanna, or Missy Elliott, or D'Angelo, really?
그를 막아보지만 잠에 들지 못해
All of that stuff is still true. It's just that my age group, are no longer the arbiters of what that looks like. And that a younger generation of black men and boys who are a little less patriarchal, a little less rigid about performing masculinity, a little more open to new ideas, and a little more interested in just rejecting the type of shit we were into, they control the show. And then you add on top of that the bitterness and all the other aspects of surviving black masculinity in this society, and you get a lot of older black men that are just acting like asses all over the place, trying to find a way to remain relevant like they were 20 years ago, to feel like they have a sense of power and control somewhere in this equation. And that again is the saddest thing, is that a lot of this is just this weird cry for help. And Nasheed took this serious issue, this historical aspect of our story that has been unaddressed and uninvestigated, and exploited it to exploit the insecurities of black men around my age. And so now we have a whole generation of black men who are complaining and whining that they don't have what they want in life because black women won't let black men lead, or gay people have an agenda, and there's too much twerking, and like Snoop Dogg of all people had the nerve to say something about WAP. And I'm smiling, but like I am truly deeply hurt by the experience and the revelation that was truly understanding this movie. Because, you know, my birthday just recently passed. I am 39 years old. And the last 10 years have been legit life-changing. For a lot of reasons. But one of the main things that happened was that in the last 10 years, it started to truly crystallize to me that I needed to go through a process of detoxifying my understanding of what it meant to be a man. And part of that was because, you know, I had recently gotten married and I wanted to be a good husband. Part of that was because I went to grad school and I got around all these different types of people with different perspectives on the world, and I had to be educated. And I got cursed out a few times, and I got drugged a few times because I was taking a lot of, you know, regressive shit into these classes. And I remember being in class and being the only heterosexual black male in a class of queer people talking about queer theory, and me just really needing to shut the fuck up. And so that changed me. But the thing that really like put me on that course was the fact that I had two boys of my own. And what made it possible for me to even get to this state was that I knew something was wrong. And I think most black men know that something is wrong with the way we are existing in this world. And you don't have to look at the data on suicide or substance abuse or the numerous black men that are estranged from their families and are having struggles with partnerships. And I know a lot of dudes that are pushing 40 that really wish they could be in a relationship, but they can't. Not just because black women ain't this, black women ain't that, but like in private, in the conversations that we have among ourselves, they say shit like, man, am I worthy of love? Can I keep a woman? Am I just so broken that I don't know how to be with a person? And so suddenly I have two baby boys myself. And all I could think about was, how do I not repeat this cycle for them? And I'm not just talking about the cycle of, you know, systemic racism and hoping that they're not shot in the street by a police officer, but how do I also keep them from growing up and contributing to misogyny and homophobia and diminishing their own emotional health and their own understanding of who they are and who they can be for the sake of performing masculinity? How do I make sure that they can be emotionally whole and know how to express themselves when they have difficulties? Like, all of that shit is in direct conflict with patriarchy. But sometimes I feel like I'm the only person doing this, and I'd be low-key scared, man. Am I setting my sons up to be bullied? And I know that I'm not the only one. Like, I know a lot of brothers. I'm so thankful that I have a lot of black men in my circle who have the same view of the world that I do. But I also recognize that a lot of those dudes, they got to go to college and they had resources and access to information and knowledge and experiences that took them off of that trajectory. But a lot of dudes don't have that shit. And a lot of those dudes watch this movie unironically, and they truly think that the solution to their problems is less gay people or more patriarchy. And as I said in the beginning, that has never really helped us. And so these dudes need help, but people like Tariq Nasheed and Kevin Samuels and all the others are wasting our time and energy. And so there's a lot of brothers out there lost, and some of those brothers are raising boys to be just as lost as they were, and they are engaging with women and harming them, and they're just contributing to a lot of fucking problems. And I don't even know what to do about it. But I know that those people didn't make it this far in the video, so it is what it is. That's all I got for today, y'all. I am tired. Very, very tired. Peace out.